Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, September 5th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about ad reservations in battleground states and the Kamala Harris campaign spending far more money in the key and crucial states for this 2024 presidential election, outpacing Republicans in every single battleground state, regardless of where it is across the country. What we have on our screen right now are the ad reservations after Labor Day, which just happened earlier on this week. The reservations across Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Nevada, and Omaha, which encompasses Nebraska's 2nd congressional district here. A significant amount of money being spent in the battleground states that matter the most for this election, and it comes at a time where today we are seeing announced that the Kamala Harris campaign has raised double the amount that Donald Trump did in the past month alone. A lot of the times we talked about how the Kamala Harris campaign raised hundreds of millions of dollars in the past month. What we see is that during the time of the DNC, during the time of the VP announcement, during the time of the Kamala Harris campaign, which has been taking place for just around a month and a half now, Kamala Harris has raised over $300 million in the month of August. The Trump campaign raised just 130. And so this is also something that contributes to the way advertisements are done and spent in a campaign. The Biden campaign strategy was to really outpace Donald Trump in terms of fundraising month after month after month. And around the time of Donald Trump's mugshot release was the time at which we saw that advertisement spending might turn around against the Democratic Party. But that was all the way back in August, and it didn't really come to fruition until around the end of May 31st, when the guilty verdict was given to Donald Trump and his legal team, ultimately raising over $100 million around that time frame, the span of a week there, that we saw a lot of money being funneled into the Trump campaign, boosting the Donald Trump candidacy for this November across the battleground states. They had more money for field offices, they had more money for ads, and at that time, they were roughly even with that of the Biden campaign, with more cash on hand. And going into the RNC with the J.D. Vance announcement and the failed assassination attempt on Donald Trump, multiple points really boosted Donald Trump's odds at winning the presidency, and also just generally speaking, showed a level of really electoral prowess that the Trump team seemingly had, right? This level of electability that was not displayed in 2016, certainly not displayed in 2020, but was on full display in the 2024 election, and it also came down to fundraising. Because the Trump team being on track to really match the Democratic Party, they had already spent over $100 million in trying to change the minds of Americans by sending ads to battleground states, focusing on the digital, focusing where they needed to. But the Donald Trump team really came back and went full force, raised enough money to really match them. But then Kamala Harris entered into the race, and in around a week, Democrats had outraised the entire 2 months of June and July for the Trump team in a very short period of time, and Donald Trump's team in August raises just $130 million, where the Harris team raises over $300 million. They are, quite frankly, drowning the Republican Party, and the only states where we really see the Donald Trump team matching Democratic spending is in Pennsylvania and Georgia. But beyond that, Michigan, you are seeing Democrats nearly in a 10-to-1 ratio outpacing Republicans in advertisement spending for the presidency. In Michigan, Democrats are outpacing Republicans, Arizona Democrats are outpacing Republicans 3-to-1. In Wisconsin, 10-to-1. In North Carolina, nearly 10-to-1. In Nevada, over 10-to-1. And in Omaha, Republicans have spent exactly $0. Kamala Harris's campaign spent $7. And the reason why this matters is because advertisement spending is amongst the most important things you can do in an election cycle. And Republicans have had the benefit over the past 3 cycles of not having to raise as much money as Democrats to do as well on the electoral scale. But the problem lies in the fact that when you get drowned in a campaign in cash and advertisement spending that Kamala Harris's candidacy and her campaign very clearly have, becomes a problem for messaging. Because Joe Biden's campaign never raised as much money as Kamala Harris did in the same period of time. Looking back at the month of August in 2020, Kamala Harris raised more money than Joe Biden did. And we have seen that in these past few weeks, Kamala Harris's candidacy has only been further exemplified by the DNC when it comes down to fundraising, when it comes down to the money being flown into the campaign, the enthusiasm for Democrats making up that gap that Republicans left when Biden was at the top of the ticket for the party. You saw here that across these battleground states, and you continue to see it, Kamala Harris's campaign is drowning the Republican Party to a point where Kamala Harris is continuing to do well in the polls that Republicans swore up and down was just a moment in which Kamala Harris was beating Trump because of a bump. We were told back in July, we saw Chris LaSavita, the Donald Trump campaign manager, alongside many others, who Republicans were saying, this is a honeymoon period. This is a honeymoon period. Well, we are equal days out from the election that we are, going all the way back to around the time, even before the first presidential debate, we are closer to the election than we were that first presidential debate. And so when we saw all of these, early indications that Kamala Harris would do better as a candidate, did better as a candidate, the Republicans promised that in those earlier stages, it was a honeymoon. But here's the catch, right? When Donald Trump was up against Kamala Harris in the beginning, Donald Trump maintained his lead. We saw that the averages here didn't give Kamala Harris the upper hand until around August 5th. And so it was at this time where the Kamala Harris campaign realized that they actually were in the positive. But this was a month ago. A month ago today was the time at which Kamala Harris started taking the lead. That matters, right? So Donald Trump's team back then, when she was down a point, down to 2 points, they were saying, this is a honeymoon. This is the immediate bump. This is the resurgence of the party that will last a week or 2 weeks. But what happens now when it's lasted over a month? What happens now that it's lasted through the convention? What happens now that it's handling itself through the the presidential debate, where Donald Trump is at 46%, Kamala Harris is a point away from the majority vote nationwide? And when you look at battleground states too, Kamala Harris at 50% in Wisconsin, at that majority mark, 49% in Pennsylvania, almost at that majority mark. 2 points off in Nevada, 2 points off in Georgia, 2 points off in Michigan from the majority mark, 2 points off in North Carolina, 2 points off of Arizona. Kamala Harris isn't in the same position Joe Biden was in, because he was at 40, 41, 42, 43, 44 in the polls. She's at 48, 49, 50. Wisconsin right now is a blue state. Michigan right now has Kamala Harris ahead. Pennsylvania has Kamala Harris ahead. She narrowly leads in Georgia. She narrowly leads in Nevada. And she's behind in North Carolina and Arizona, but really by less than a point in both. And the reason I bring that up is because all of these points matter. All of these metrics give us a general indicator as to how the race is going. And I can tell you this, based on what we're seeing in terms of advertisement spending, Kamala Harris has an immense opportunity to change the narrative about this race. But it also reveals something else about the Trump team. Where's their focus? Pennsylvania and Georgia, because everywhere else is getting a fraction of the spending that Democrats are doing in the state. You have to ask, why is it they're giving Michigan just $6.6 million in ad reservations? Democrats are giving it $55 million. If we were to determine who wins this election based on who's spending the more money, Nebraska's second, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina would all be states where Kamala Harris wins. Again, why? Because she's spending more money in the state. Now, I get it. American politics doesn't just work by whoever spends more money wins, though that is the case 90% of the time in congressional elections and the majority of the time in presidential elections. Regardless, though, Pennsylvania, Georgia being the main focus of the Trump team definitely raises some alarm bells. Because Arizona, for instance, too, I brought up Michigan because it was a state with a large amount of electoral votes, but I also see it in direct contrast with Arizona, which has just 11 electoral votes. Republicans spending $10 million in that state. 11 electoral votes. Just $7 million in Michigan, which has 15. Wisconsin, only 3.5. And I think a lot of this is, too, because the Donald Trump team, raising $130 million in August, has less money to go around. The Kamala Harris campaign can afford to spend $71 million in Pennsylvania, as well as $40 million in Georgia, as well as $55 million in Michigan, and $35 million in Arizona, and $33 million in Wisconsin, and $26 million in North Carolina, and $20 million in Nevada. They are in the tens of millions in every single battleground state. Donald Trump's campaign only crosses that threshold in 2 out of the 7 important states. And so when it comes down to who's dominating the airwaves, when it comes down to who has more field offices, when it comes down to who has a stronger ground game, that is where Kamala Harris really does well. And we know this to be true because we've seen it in 2020, we've seen this in 2012, we've seen this in 2008. Democratic campaigns, when they win, typically do need more money. They typically do need a more robust on-the-ground effort, absolutely. Because Hillary Clinton out-fundraised Donald Trump in 2016. She outspent Donald Trump in 2016. And so money isn't always an amazing indicator. But it is an indicator. Because in the majority of elections, it is correct. And in the majority of races like this one, where votes do come down to the tens of thousands of votes, sometimes the thousands of votes in battleground states, the spending of the money in these states is something that matters. And so Kamala Harris's campaign raising this large sum of money feels us, puts us all the way back even to 2020, when the Biden campaign could not even rake this in no matter what month it was, unless we were right before the election in the month of October, right? We were seeing record-breaking money being raised. For instance, in 2016, I remember, I was young, but I remember those news articles and all those conversations around Hillary Clinton's record-breaking month, raising $60 million in the month of July, the most ever for a presidential candidate, even adjusted for inflation. Then came 2020. Biden crossed that threshold, $160 million in these months, in the summer months. Now, Kamala Harris doubling that with $300 million, over $300 million in the month of August, more than twice what Donald Trump's campaign raised. We are in a whole new level of American politics, folks, when it comes down to the money being spent, when it comes down to the money being fundraised, the money being utilized in these battleground states. And as of right now, Kamala Harris leads in the majority of them, and in terms of where she's going to be dominating the airwaves, it is all of them. And we talked about this too 2 days ago when we mentioned how in New Hampshire, a super volunteer in the state of New Hampshire, someone who had been very associated with the Trump team and had seemingly been privy to insider information. They cited this in their email that was originally only meant to be sent to those inside the campaign, those who were going to be going up to New Hampshire to go into the field offices, to canvass, to phone bank. What they had said was that New Hampshire is no longer a swing state for the Trump team. Now, the Trump team rejected that. They said, no, we're going to win New Hampshire. This is a state that absolutely is competitive. We are still investing in the state. But they haven't sent anybody there since April. And the last person they sent there wasn't Trump. It wasn't J.D. Vance. It was Governor Doug Burgum from the state of North Dakota. They didn't invest in New Hampshire in this election to the way that Democrats did. And you might be wondering, too, people were asking, why is Kamala Harris doing a rally in New Hampshire? Rallies cost upwards of $100,000 to put on. People were asking, why is she in New Hampshire? Why is it they're playing, defense in some of these states when they need to be playing defense in some other states? Here's the answer. They have the money and ability to do so. At some point, it gets to a point of diminishing return when you're spending $250 million in the state of Pennsylvania. They know where their money is going to be the best spent. And it also helps, too, that by shoring up some of these other states earlier on, when you are sitting on tens of millions of dollars that can go to safer states, you no longer have to worry about them in the final month of the campaign. I can imagine Kamala Harris won't be in New Hampshire at all in the month of October. I can imagine Kamala Harris won't be in Colorado at all in the month of October. I can imagine that this visit to New Hampshire might be one across two in total that she will do to the state, because at the end of the day, the investment in these states now shores them up later down the line. And so Kamala Harris and Donald Trump going tit for tat when it comes down to advertisement spending in Pennsylvania and Georgia, that's good for Donald Trump. But every other state, it seems like a wash in terms of where Democrats and Republicans are investing. And the big thing that I really want us to take away from this too is that this is something that has maintained itself since the beginning of the campaign period. Donald Trump's candidacy has primarily been boosted by Joe Biden's unpopularity, not by anything else. If you look at the way they're running their campaign, they are so confident that before Biden dropped out of the race, their narrative from October 2023 was that it isn't a question as to whether or not Donald Trump will win a second term. To them, he will. It's a question of the margin of his victory. They chose J.D. Vance believing that this election would be a cakewalk and they didn't have to bring anyone on that would benefit the ticket. They chose a bunch of different things, like kicking out Ronna McDaniel and her wing and faction of the RNC to swap it in with Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA, Turning Point Action, that of Laura Trump, because they didn't believe there was any reason to have a more competent Republican Party. They nominated extremist Republicans on the down-ballot races because nothing, seemingly nothing, could drag down Donald Trump. And when it came down to the advertisement and the fundraising, they spent so much money on legal fees, they didn't have enough to go out to the same states that Democrats are doing, and then they started investing the little money that they had in states that don't matter and won't go red, opening 19 field offices in Minnesota and Virginia, campaigning in the Bronx and Wildwood, New Jersey, focusing on states and regions of this country where this election was supposed to be fun for them because they knew they were going to win, and I say this in air quotes, but now they have to backpedal. But without the infrastructure and without the money, they can't match Democratic Party spending. And with just $130 million, which I know that's a lot of money, I'd love to have that amount, right? But $130 million is over less than half of that of the Kamala Harris campaign. That matters in an election like this, where everything is going to come down to the wire. Because we are 60 days out. This isn't something that happened in January where there's time to catch up. This is a late game play by the Democratic Party, and with 61 days to go, they are winning it very, very clearly. I'll leave you on this. This election is still fundamentally close, but the state at which it was with President Biden was far worse for the Democratic Party, and now it looks a lot better. And not only does it look a lot better because of the person at the top of the ticket, but by the campaign that runs it and the amount of money that allows Kamala Harris's story to get told on a very different level, on a more intimate level, on social media, on digital, on Facebook, on TV, on mailers, on every level, volunteer work, canvassing efforts, all of these different things. The reservations we see in these battleground states are indicative of a stronger Democratic campaign. A hurdle that they will have to overcome is the fact that they've been down for the past year. Jen O'Malley Dillon, the campaign manager for Kamala Harris, has reiterated multiple times. This campaign and Kamala Harris, they are the underdogs in this race. But it looks like right now, they have enough money to match that lack of enthusiasm they exhibited over the past year, and they are able to really ramp it up and potentially expand the leads that Kamala Harris maintains in many of these battleground states. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.